This is a recap of our discussion of market failures. And what I wanted to do is give a context in terms of how does market failure fit into what we've discussed thus far. And then there's no better place to start than my famous pyramid and how we have study of choice as the foundation and the goal as the destination. So we start here and we go here. And so for the goal that we set out in this class, it's maximum sustainable profit. And all of the concepts we've covered in class basically are tools that help you make better choices to achieve a specific goal. Now, market failure has to do with this level right here, economic systems. What we've discussed is every country, with some rare exceptions, has the free market as a critical element of the economic system. Nobody has a purely free market system, but everybody has some significant portion of the economy determined by the free market system. Now, the free market system is simply just a decentralized way of making choices. Instead of having a top-down approach, it's more of a bottom-up approach. And we discussed the theoretical benefits, or one benefit, which is efficiency. And the way the free market system achieves a higher level of efficiency than other economic systems is through communication and competition. Now, market failure, in part, has to do with the problem at this level of the pyramid. In other words, there is some flaw in some portion of our economic system, in this case, the free market system. And we discussed that there are four common sources of market failure, but each source can be categorized under two broader categories, which is systemic failure and non-systemic failure. Systemic failure is there's something wrong with the free market system in achieving its goal of efficiency. If the free market system is inefficient, it's not working. Non-systemic is when the free market system is doing what it's supposed to do, achieve efficient outcomes. We just don't like the efficient outcome. So you can see here the four general sources of market failure are going to fall under either systemic or non-systemic. Now you can see how I have here competition or communication. That's where the breakdown occurs. So if you have a breakdown in competition, you can't achieve higher levels of productive efficiency. That's systemic failure. Market power can cause that. Externalities is the pricing mechanism is incomplete, so it has incomplete information. Therefore, that's a breakdown in communication. That means the free market system can't achieve allocative efficiency. That's a systemic failure. A public good, another breakdown in communication. That's a systemic failure. And then there's this catch-all, equality, sometimes called equity, but this is a general category where the free market system is simply producing outcomes that the citizens or the market participants do not like. And it could be the efficient outcome. So in other words, the free market system could be working exactly as it is intended and yet still fail us. And that's neither a breakdown in communication or competition. And this is what we call a non-systemic failure. So when you think about inequality, inequality could be the efficient outcome within the market, but we're not happy with it. Environmental degradation could be the efficient outcome of the market. We're not happy with it. So efficiency isn't everything. And this is one of the best ways to understand why we do not have a purely free market system and why nobody ever has. Because the free market system is inadequate to be the complete system because it only cares about one thing, efficiency. Though efficiency is important, you need efficiency for sustainability. It cannot be the only element. So the free market system needs to be supplemented, and you need to know that the free market system can fail, and it does need correction if possible. So what I wanted to do is just focus on externalities and how it's a breakdown in communication. And the way I do that is I show you this nice little graph here. And this is for perfect competition, a demand curve, a marginal cost curve, an ATC curve. Now, when there are no externalities, the cost curve, marginal cost curve, think of this as the supply curve for the firm, contains all relevant cost information, and therefore when you do MR equals MC, the firm can produce the allocatively efficient rate of output. But what if this cost curve does not contain all information? In other words, what if there's a third party who has nothing to do with this market transaction is paying part of the cost? Well, that means there's going to be a divergence between the private cost curve, MC1, and the social cost curve. The social cost curve is the entire cost to society. And what we see here is the social cost curve is going to be somewhere around MC2. And the divergence between social cost and private cost, that vertical distance between these two curves, that's the negative externality. That's the amount of information that's missing from the cost curve. And as you could see, if the true cost to society was reflected, the rate of output would be different, because if you did an MR equals MC, you would have this point right here, which would lead to this rate of output. So can you see where externalities are not accounted for? This leads to overproduction. If all costs are accounted for, you produce a lower amount. And you could see that more apparently right here. Private cost, social cost. So social cost is private cost plus any externalities. So you take your private cost, add the externality, it shifts upward to the social cost curve. So this is a way for you to see how when there's an externality, when costs or benefits are not properly reflected in the supply and demand curves, it leads to a rate of output that's not socially optimal. And that's the big takeaway from that. And so we talked about some ways of fixing it. The way of fixing this is we got to shift this private cost curve to get it on top of the social cost curve. In other words, we don't want any externalities. When you internalize an externality, all you're doing is shifting the private cost curve, marginal cost curve, onto the social cost curve. When they're on each other, that means there are no externalities. And we talked about market-based solutions and non-market-based solutions. A market-based solution is something like an emission charge or tax. And in other words, you're not telling people what to do. You're just saying, if you're going to conduct yourself in a way that's causing an externality, you got to account for that externality. In other words, you got to pay that external cost. And as a result, people will adjust their behavior. A non-market-based approach would be regulation. You're simply telling people you can't do X, Y, and Z, even if you're willing to pay for the externality. That's a non-market-based approach. Market-based approaches tend to be preferred if they can be implemented because they are less costly to implement, because you're not regulating how people act. They're in charge of how they behave. They're just simply going to account for their costs by paying for it. So that's kind of the big takeaway from this. Next class, I'm going to be talking about the financial crisis and how that was a market failure. And it was also a breakdown in communication too. So I just wanted to give you a nice little overview of how things relate to what we've discussed in class thus far.